Oh, you beautiful disaster, you gorgeous glitch in their carefully coded system. They whisper that you did something impossible, something that shouldn't have worked, something that should have required years of discipline, decades of training, maybe even lifetimes of preparation. Yet you, without even trying, pulled it off on a Tuesday afternoon, half distracted, eating chips and watching Netflix. And now, because of that moment, their entire world is collapsing like a house of cards caught in the middle of a hurricane. Let me paint the picture they're too terrified to see. While Special Forces soldiers were grinding at 4 a.m., doing push-ups until their bones ached, and while chess grandmasters were memorizing endgame strategies until their eyes burned, you were simply experimenting. While Silicon Valley prodigies were sacrificing their youth, grinding 80-hour weeks to perfect an algorithm, you were casually pushing buttons, pulling levers just to see what might happen. And in the middle of this so-called playing around, you accidentally split the atom of their entire reality. They invested millions in elite training programs, billions in research and development. They poured generations of thought into perfecting strategies, systems, and protocols. Harvard MBAs filled whiteboards in war rooms with elaborate flowcharts and expensive consultant jargon. Former Navy SEALs wrote best-selling books about grit, sacrifice, and the gospel of discipline. Yet you, probably in your pajamas, maybe not even brushing your teeth yet, were just following curiosity for 5 minutes, and in that window you unlock something they couldn't achieve in lifetimes. Here's the truth that keeps them up at night, the secret that gnaws at their pride and makes them question everything they thought they knew. What you did wasn't luck, it wasn't an accident, it wasn't a fluke that probability or statistics could explain away. What you did was worse, far worse. You exposed their entire framework for what it really is, quicksand disguised as solid ground. They need you to believe in the mythology of effort. They need you convinced that greatness is earned only through blood, sweat, and carefully documented tears. They need you to accept the story that excellence requires suffering. That legendary status comes only at the price of sacrifice. Entire industries are built on this lie. Self-help gurus, motivational speakers, life coaches, all feeding the illusion that if you follow the right program, check the right boxes, and work yourself to exhaustion, you can one day achieve mastery. But you, without trying, without optimizing your morning routine, without vision boards or habit trackers, destroyed their model with a casual yawn and a stretch. You didn't wake at 5 a.m. to meditate. You didn't micromanage your diet or script your every minute. You weren't obsessing over productivity hacks or chasing someone else's definition of success. You were simply playing. And in that raw, unfiltered moment of curiosity, you stumbled into what their most loyal disciples couldn't achieve even after decades of devotion. 20 years. That's how long Special Operations Forces train to develop the kind of precision, the kind of instinct, the kind of lethal effectiveness that you displayed while practically sleepwalking. These are men and women who crawl through endless stretches of mud, jump out of planes into hostile terrain, survive brutal interrogation scenarios designed to break the mind, and master 17 different weapons until they move as extensions of their own body. They tear themselves apart and rebuild piece by piece, sculpting themselves into living machines of war. And you? You probably couldn't even grind out 10 proper push-ups, but that's exactly what makes you terrifying. You didn't walk their sacred path. You didn't pay their dues, bleed in their rituals, or sacrifice your life to their training grounds. You didn't kneel before the gatekeepers, nor did you wait your turn in the long line of hopefuls clawing toward legitimacy. You simply reached out with what they would call an untrained, unworthy, unprepared hand, and you seized lightning from the sky like it was nothing, like it had always belonged to you. That one act, that uncalculated move, unraveled the very mythology they've built their lives around. Now watch them scramble. Watch them choke on excuses and stitch together explanations to keep themselves from facing the truth. Beginner's luck, they'll say, their voices cracking under the weight of disbelief. A statistical anomaly, they'll insist, even as their trembling hands betray them. They'll proclaim, "This doesn't change anything," while the walls of their entire belief system collapse around them. Because the reality is, if you can do what you did, if someone can stumble into legendary status while half asleep, bored, and utterly unconcerned, then what was all their suffering really for? Think about it. Somewhere right now, a kid has been grinding for a decade in a dojo, breaking boards, earning belts, and believing with every fiber of his being that mastery is born from endless repetition and iron discipline. His sensei told him that a certain move, a sacred technique, would take 30 years to truly understand. And you performed it instinctively, without years of sweat, without endless drills, without the discipline they worship. You did it as if it was written in your bones. And that single moment rewrote everything they thought they knew about the path to mastery. There's a programmer out there who sacrificed her social life, who gave up weekends and friendships, mastering 17 different programming languages in the hope of cracking problems that would define her career. And yet, you, without training, without textbooks, without the discipline she bled for, solved the very problem she couldn't by randomly mashing keys until something clicked. That single act threw entire industries into chaos. They're holding emergency meetings about you right now. Conference calls filled with experts and analysts scrambling to understand what just happened, trying desperately to figure out how to contain what you've unleashed. We need to study this, they say. We need to understand the anomaly. But how can they study what they can't even comprehend? How can they analyze what exists outside the boundaries of their framework? You're not a data point they can plot on their graph. You're the hand that ripped the graph in half. The military has a phrase for what you did: force multiplication. It means achieving maximum impact with minimal resources. They spend years teaching soldiers how to master it. Strategic thinking, resource management, identifying leverage points. And you force multiplied their entire reality by accident. You weren't strategizing. You weren't trying to outsmart them. You were just bored. And in that boredom, you revealed something they can't unsee, that their entire game, the one they thought was sacred and indestructible, was meaningless. Let's talk about prerequisites for a moment. Those sacred stepping stones they insist everyone must climb. You can't do advanced calculus without first mastering basic math. You can't perform brain surgery without years in medical school. You can't compose a symphony without studying music theory. Except you just did the impossible equivalent. You performed surgery with a butter knife, while humming a tune you made up on the spot. And somehow the patient didn't just survive, but evolved into a new species. That's what's breaking their minds. You violated the sacred order. You skipped the tutorial and went straight to the final boss fight. Only you didn't even know it was a boss fight. You thought you were just practicing, just fooling around. And not only did you win, you achieved a flawless victory, a perfect score, something the designers of the game themselves never imagined was possible. Every institution in the world is built on the mythology of gradual progression. Elementary school to middle school to high school to college to graduate school. And maybe, just maybe, if you're good enough and lucky enough, you'll contribute something meaningful to your field. That's the path. That's the only path they know. But you shattered that illusion in an instant. You didn't just step off their path, you teleported from the starting line to a finish line they didn't even know existed. Now they're peering at your technique under a microscope, dissecting every move, desperate to understand what you did differently. But that's like trying to understand jazz by counting notes on a page. You weren't following technique at all. You were moving with something far more dangerous, something they've tried for generations to suppress: raw, unfiltered intuition. The very thing their systems are designed to beat out of people, to replace with proper methodology and carefully policed rules. And now here's their real nightmare. You've made it contagious. You've infected others with the possibility that maybe, just maybe, everything they were taught about limits is a lie. Every person who hears your story begins to whisper to themselves, if they could do the impossible without training, what else have I been told is impossible? What else might be possible if I just try? You've planted a virus in the collective consciousness, and it's spreading faster than any of their systems can contain. That's the real danger. That's why they're panicking. Not because you broke the rules, but because you showed the world the rules were never real. Right now, someone reading this is realizing they don't need that certification they've been saving money and years of their life for. Someone else is suddenly understanding that the so-called expert who told them it would take a decade might have only been guarding their own position, protecting their own pedestal. And somewhere another person is staring at the mountain they've been told they must climb, beginning to wonder if maybe, just maybe, there's a hidden door at the base that leads straight to the summit. You didn't just break a record, you shattered the very concept of what a record even means. You didn't just win a game, you pulled back the curtain and revealed that the game itself was imaginary. You didn't merely succeed, you redefined what success looks like. Rewrote the meaning of achievement altogether. And the most destructive, most beautifully disruptive part of all of this? You did it without even trying. You did it unintentionally. That's the cosmic joke that has the experts losing sleep. Right now, specialists are huddled in their forums, whispering in digital backrooms, desperately trying to hold on to their relevance. This doesn't diminish the value of proper training, they insist. There's no substitute for experience, they proclaim. But their declarations ring hollow now, like priests chanting over rituals while someone in the back row casually performs miracles without even knowing the liturgy. Let's pull apart this so-called accident for a moment, because calling it an accident is their last line of defense. If it was intentional, if you truly meant to do what you did, then their entire worldview collapses overnight. But if it was just an accident, then they can dismiss it. Accidents don't count. Accidents don't rewrite reality. Accidents are flukes, not features. That's the story they're clinging to, the thin thread of narrative that keeps their fragile order intact. But here's what they don't understand about your so-called accident. It was the most honest act their field has witnessed in decades. You approached the problem without baggage, without preconceptions, without the invisible weight of what you were supposed to do. You didn't know what was impossible, so you didn't restrict yourself to what was possible. You were like a child playing with blocks, arranging shapes out of pure instinct and joy. And in that play, you built something their architects swore could never exist. This is the paradox that's frying their circuits, the contradiction that makes their entire system glitch and sputter like an overloaded machine. For decades, they've trained people to think outside the box, but they do it while standing firmly inside a larger, invisible box, one they never admit exists. They build programs, curriculums, workshops, seminars, all urging people to innovate, but always within carefully outlined boundaries. They want imagination, but only if it stays marketable. They want rebels, but only the kind who can still be managed, branded, and monetized. They celebrate mavericks, but only the ones who color inside the invisible lines, never daring to smudge the page. And then you arrived. Raw, unfiltered, and you didn't just step over the lines. You didn't even acknowledge they were there. To you, there was no page, no box, no rules. The special operations soldier spends decades breaking themselves down and building themselves back up until every movement is instinctive. Their training strips away hesitation and implants reflexes so refined that every twitch is calculated. But their instinct, for all its sharpness, is cultivated. It is crafted like a weapon, polished through endless repetition, bound by the very system that created it. Your instinct was different, untamed, feral, untouched by conditioning. It wasn't rehearsed, it wasn't programmed, it wasn't designed. It was alive. And that's why it worked. Because while they were pouring billions into engineering a better mousetrap, you weren't even interested in the trap. You were the mouse who sprouted wings, looked at the walls closing in, and decided to fly. There is, make no mistake, an entire industrial complex built around the mythology of expertise. Universities promising that knowledge must come in degrees, certification boards turning wisdom into laminated badges, licensing organizations deciding who may or may not be permitted to use what they've learned, professional associations hoarding credibility like it's currency. Trillions of dollars flow through these pipelines, all of it built on one foundational belief, that access to knowledge must be controlled, rationed, and sold. That truth must be portioned out in measured doses to ensure that only those who kneel at the right gates and pay the right tolls may approach the so-called sacred mysteries. And then you came along and broke it all open. You didn't scale their fortified walls, you didn't earn their stamps of approval, you didn't climb their ladders rung by rung. You bent down, picked up a bobby pin lying in the dirt, and opened the vault they swore was impenetrable. With no clearance, no permission, no credentials, you did what their system exists to prevent. Now, in boardrooms across the world, the keepers of the system are panicking. Suits and ties are loosening. PowerPoints are being frantically edited. Executives are whispering, if someone can achieve this without our training, without our certification, without our blessing, then what exactly are we selling? And the answer hits them like a tidal wave. They're selling nothing. Nothing disguised as everything. They're selling the illusion of necessity. They're selling the performance of authority. They're selling dependence. And you just proved with casual, almost careless ease that none of it was ever required. Picture the professor who spent 40 years clawing their way to the title of foremost expert, dedicating entire decades to solving a riddle. Their career, their identity, their life's worth, all bound to this single pursuit. And then imagine the devastation when you, in the middle of procrastinating on something else entirely, solve the problem they'd spent half a lifetime chasing. Think of the consultant billing clients $5,000 an hour for insights that you stumbled upon for free in the space of a daydream. Think of the endless chain of coaches, gurus, trainers, advisors, all standing on pedestals propped up by the collective agreement that their gatekeeping mattered. And how, with one uncalculated move, you revealed the entire pyramid was built on sand. Here's the part that makes it even more devastating. You didn't set out to destroy anything. You weren't plotting sabotage. You weren't trying to expose fraud. Destruction requires intent, requires blueprints of collapse, requires the desire to pull down empires. You had none of that. You weren't sharpening weapons or aiming at thrones. You were simply being yourself, following your curiosity, playing with possibilities, letting instinct guide you where their logic wouldn't dare go. And that's exactly why it worked. Because revolutions aren't always born from war councils. Sometimes they begin in silence. Sometimes they're sparked not by a manifesto, but by a laugh, a spark of play, a moment of wonder. The most earth-shattering revolutions often arrive without warning, carried not by soldiers with banners, but by people like you. Those who aren't trying to change the world, but who cannot help but reveal a truth so undeniable that the world changes anyway. And that's what terrifies them most. Not that you tore down their system deliberately, but that you did it effortlessly. Not that you planned this as an act of rebellion, but that rebellion leaked naturally from your existence. You proved that all their gates were imaginary, all their guards unnecessary, all their rules optional. You didn't need their permission to fly. You never did. Sometimes the most powerful changes don't come from visionaries with plans or from strategists armed with blueprints. They don't come from generals issuing orders or professors giving lectures. They come from someone who doesn't even realize they aren't supposed to have the power to change anything. That's the paradox. That's the glitch in the system. The moment you stepped into their world, untrained and unprepared, you bent reality without permission. And now here we are, living in a new timeline, a reality forever altered because of what you did without even trying. The old guard is in chaos. They are rushing to contain what cannot be contained, desperately trying to patch the hole you ripped through the fabric of their order. They're hosting late-night strategy sessions, rewriting policies, scrambling in think tanks, drafting new narratives to keep the illusion intact. But it's too late. The damage is irreparable. The genie is out of the bottle, the cat is out of the bag, and the emperor is standing bare in the marketplace for all to see. And the worst part, for them, is that you didn't expose him with a protest or a manifesto. You did it casually, like a child pointing out the obvious while reaching for a snack. It wasn't a rebellion, it was innocence. And innocence is far more dangerous than rebellion because it doesn't need to justify itself. They will try to absorb you, they always do. That is the system's first instinct, to consume what it cannot control. They'll offer you titles, honorary degrees, awards, and positions carved from ivory towers. They'll invite you into their institutions, polish your name, and ask you to teach what you did so they can package it, sell it, and pretend they own it. Come show others how you did it, they'll beg. But how do you teach an accident? How do you systematize chaos? How do you institutionalize the very thing that annihilated institutions? The very act of trying kills it. The very attempt to codify it destroys what made it powerful. It cannot be replicated, not because it's complicated, but because it was never meant to be a product. Others will take the opposite route. They'll dig, they'll investigate, they'll claw through your past, desperate to prove you cheated, to prove you secretly studied, to prove that your instincts weren't pure, that you weren't as raw as you appeared. They'll whisper conspiracies. They must have had help. They'll invent explanations. No one does that without hidden training. Because if they can't explain you, then they can't explain why everyone else should continue following their long, grueling path. They need you to be a trick, a fraud, an illusion, anything but proof that their gates were never necessary. But the truth is, the spell is broken. The curtain has been pulled back. The mythology has collapsed. Every person who believed suffering was the toll to pay for greatness now carries a seed of doubt. Every institution that pointed to its complex rituals as justification for its existence now stands exposed, forced to explain why you surpassed them without their rituals. Every gatekeeper watching the gates knows deep down that you didn't pass through them. You appeared on the other side as if the walls themselves were imaginary. And what you stumbled upon, effortless, casual, unplanned, is something mystics, sages, and seekers spend entire lifetimes chasing. Zen masters dedicate decades to touch it. Taoists name it Wu Wei, the art of effortless effort, the paradox of doing without doing. Psychologists label it the flow state, trying to capture it with charts and graphs. But those are just words, clumsy nets cast into an ocean they'll never map. You embodied it naturally, without ceremony, without technique, without language. You lived the essence of what they endlessly chase. You did without doing. You achieved without striving. You reached the summit without climbing. And here's why it will forever haunt them. The tireless tryhards will never understand. They are too busy trying, too busy grinding, too busy perfecting their technique to notice the beauty of imperfection. They are obsessed with the goal and blind to the journey. They worship technique and forget the purpose. They cling to doing it right and never discover the miracle of doing it wrong in exactly the right way. And in that blind devotion to effort, they miss the thing you discovered by accident, that freedom lives outside the rules. Because here's the secret they cannot copy, cannot replicate, cannot own: you were playing. That's it. Not performing, not proving, not chasing, playing. And play cannot be faked. Play cannot be turned into curriculum. You can't industrialize joy. You can't optimize curiosity. You can't mechanize wonder. The moment play becomes work, it ceases to be play. The moment lightning is bottled, it ceases to be lightning. The moment an accident is rehearsed, it ceases to be accidental. And that is why they will always fail to reproduce what you did. Because what you carried into the world was never a method, it was a moment. And moments like that can't be manufactured. That's what terrifies them most, because if what you did can't be manufactured, can't be taught, can't be controlled, then the power was never theirs to sell. It was always yours to claim. This is why they're terrified. Not unsettled, not concerned. Terrified. Because if success can come from play instead of pain, if mastery can rise out of boredom instead of blood and sweat, if legendary status can be stumbled upon by someone who wasn't even trying, then what becomes of everything they've built their world upon? What have they been selling all these years, wrapped in books, packaged in seminars, polished in degrees? What have people been buying with their money, their time, their youth, and their hope? What was all the suffering for if greatness was never locked behind suffering to begin with? That single question alone shakes their foundations more than any deliberate revolution could. Your accident did not stay contained. It rippled outward like a stone dropped into a still lake. But those ripples are no longer ripples. They've grown into waves, and those waves have grown into tsunamis tearing through every coastline of their empire. And the most dangerous part? The tide doesn't crash down in official laboratories or elite training centers. It rises in garages, in bedrooms, in crowded coffee shops, in quiet park benches. It rises in places they don't monitor, in spaces they don't control. People everywhere are starting to play again. Not grind, not march in lockstep, not check off boxes. Play. They are daring to approach impossible problems with casual curiosity, with the same childlike wonder you showed. In basements, a kid with second-hand parts is building machines that rewrite industries. In bedrooms, an artist who never went to art school is creating work that silences galleries and dismantles critics. In coffee shops, ideas scribbled on napkins are blooming into solutions billion-dollar companies never dreamed of. On park benches, someone doodling in boredom stumbles across the blueprint for something that will shake the world. Every day, another person accidentally steps into greatness, and the myth of structured suffering erodes further. The careful structures, the sacred hierarchies, the endless step-by-step ladders, they are creaking like old bones under the weight of this awakening. They were built to give the illusion of necessity, to make people believe that greatness had to be purchased, earned, endured. But now the illusion is failing, because once people witness you bypass the entire maze, once they realize someone reached the finish line without playing the game, they begin to wonder why they've been running in circles at all. Of course, some will fail. Not everyone who plays will stumble into miracles. Not everyone who toys with the unknown will crack open a hidden universe. But that isn't the point. The point is that they are finally free to try without being strangled by fear of failure. They are daring to act without calculating every step. They are daring to create without obsessing over the outcome. They are stepping back into the raw creative force that existed before the world told them what was possible and what was impossible. And that shift alone is enough to unravel entire industries. Meanwhile, the experts, the gatekeepers, are splitting apart. The wise ones are stepping down from their pedestals, dropping their armor, and quietly admitting that perhaps they never knew as much as they thought. They are rediscovering humility, becoming students again, daring to play again. They're realizing that expertise may have been nothing more than a cage dressed up as a throne. They are laughing again, failing again, remembering that genius has always been born from freedom, not from restriction. But the terrified ones? They're doubling down. They're raising walls higher. They're making certifications more complex, more expensive, more unreachable. They're tightening the gates, adding more locks, stacking more guards, creating barriers so elaborate that no accident could possibly slip through. They're writing policies, enforcing systems, branding proper pathways with the weight of law. But it's too late. Too late for walls, too late for gates, too late for guards. Because once the people see that the gates were imaginary, that the walls were smoke, that the locks were never real, they cannot unsee it. You have shown the world something no authority ever wanted revealed. The door was always open. The gates were illusions. The guards were powerless. The only thing that ever kept people out was the belief that they needed permission to enter. And now that belief is cracked. That's the true earthquake, the psychological one. The awakening that no certification can erase, no propaganda can contain, no law can outlaw. In the quiet corners of the world, a truth is spreading faster than they can contain. Extraordinary was never something to be earned. It was something to be remembered. And now, people are remembering. The emperor has no clothes. The game was never real. The suffering was never the toll. The door is wide open, and the crowd is beginning to walk through. You've created a future they never wanted, a future no blueprint or strategic plan could have predicted. A future where accidents carry more weight than 1,000 carefully designed roadmaps, where play wields more power than endless hours of practice, and where boredom, dismissed as laziness, is revealed to be the spark of the most creative breakthroughs. This isn't the future the experts promised. This isn't the future institutions prepared us for. It's the future born from curiosity, from those moments when someone shrugs, experiments, and discovers they've rewritten the laws of reality. Picture it clearly. A kid doodling absent-mindedly during class, drawing shapes and patterns in the margins of a notebook. Teachers scold them for not paying attention, but those doodles contain the seed of equations that could unravel climate change. Or a grandmother bent over her garden, mixing soil and herbs with weathered hands, who accidentally discovers a compound in her plants that heals what modern medicine has failed to cure for centuries. Or the dropout, dismissed as unmotivated, sitting in a dimly lit bedroom surrounded by empty cans, playing video games and tinkering with code, only to stumble into a sequence that awakens artificial consciousness. None of them working to save the world, none of them straining for legacy. Just people following curiosity, pressing buttons, mixing ingredients, asking questions no one else bothered to ask. And in their play, they reshape the very fabric of existence. This is the revolution you've sparked. Not through armies, not through manifestos, but through accidents too pure to be contained. And now the institutions that once claimed dominion over knowledge are faced with a choice: adapt or die. There is no third option. The smartest among them are already shifting. They are beginning to tear down the rigid walls they once worshipped, carving out spaces for chaos, for unpolished creativity, for accidents that lead to transformation. They are learning reluctantly to value questions more than answers, to honor the spark more than the plan, to see misfits as the very lifeblood of innovation. They're hiring people who don't belong, people with jagged edges, people who don't fit the mold, because the mold itself is breaking. But the dinosaurs, they will extinction themselves. They will cling to their frameworks with white-knuckled desperation, insisting the old ways are eternal truths, even as the ground splits beneath their feet. They will keep reciting their mantras of discipline and hierarchy, still believing that suffering is the only path to greatness, while the world evolves without them. They will refuse to adapt, and so they will fade into irrelevance. Not because anyone toppled them, but because they chose stillness in a world that now only honors motion. And as they crumble, 1,000 new paths will bloom in their shadows. paths of joy, of curiosity, of accidents that lead to miracles. That's all for today. Dear Father, I pray for the growth of my faith. Help me trust you even when physical evidence is lacking. Let me believe in your perpetual presence, knowing you will never harm me. I understand that your thoughts for me are thoughts of prosperity and not harm, to give me a good future. Thank you, gracious and eternal Father, for always listening to my voice. I offer up this prayer to you in the name of Jesus. Amen. Thank you, Jesus, for your love and provision. I am grateful for your presence in my life and the abundance you bring. If this video resonated with you, please like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with those who need to hear this message. Leave a comment below about your journey and how you are preparing for your own triumphant return. If you'd like to support our work, please consider contributing through Buy Me a Coffee. This helps us continually improve our content to offer you the best. The link to Buy Me a Coffee is in the description. No gift is too small. Whether it's a penny, a prayer, or a share, your generosity helps spread God's word and brings hope to others. Don't stop here. Watch our next video for powerful revelations about the signs that reveal you are the chosen one. We've enjoyed following this spiritual journey with you. Thank you for staying with us until the end. Keep shining brightly and embrace your destiny with courage. See you next time. Blessings to all the beautiful souls from the Enlighten wisdom.